Fernando Pessoa. Fernando Pessoa.
Fernando Pessoa.
Fernando Pessoa para todas as pessoas. Olá, viva! Neste próximo sábado, dia 4 de julho, às 3 da tarde, continua em Oeiras, na livraria Galeria Verney, o ciclo comparatista pessoano Fernando Pessoa et al., com entrada livre. Desta vez, a sessão debruça-se sobre o Fernando Pessoa, de Agostinho da Silva, um dos maiores pensadores da história de Portugal. Ao publicar em 1958 a primeira edição do seu livro Fernando Pessoa, assim mesmo, entre muitos possíveis que ele sabia já reconhecer e diferentes, Agostinho da Silva ficou também nos anais da história dos estudos pessoanos, sendo um dos pioneiros da análise da obra do escritor de mensagem, além de Agostinho da Silva, referencial até nos nossos dias. Os vasos comunicantes de Agostinho da Silva com pessoas são óbvios nas entrevistas de uma vida inteira, no Portugal futuro que ambos desejariam, na atividade tradutora, nas leituras de favoritos como Walt Whitman ou até nos poemas que o filósofo dedicou ao poeta, coligidos em 1990 no livro do Agostinho em torno do Pessoa. No dia 4 de julho deste 2006, próximo sábado então, na livraria Galeria Municipal Verney, em Oeiras, é tempo então para a quinta e penúltima sessão do ciclo comparatista Fernando Pessoa et al., e aí analisaremos todos estes laços entre Agostinho da Silva e Fernando Pessoa, um trabalho deste vosso que não podem perder, até porque a entrada é livre. Entretanto, na Casa Fernando Pessoa, o fim de semana é de visitas guiadas, no sábado, dia 4, e no domingo, dia 5, entre as 4 e as 5 da tarde. As peças da exposição da Casa Fernando Pessoa transportam histórias e memórias sobre o escritor, o que ele leu, como escreveu e o tempo em que viveu. Nem tudo está, apesar disso, obviamente, escrito nas legendas que as explicam ou na parede. Na equipa de mediação do museu há pessoas que conhecem detalhes inesperados, factos surpreendentes, possíveis ligações até que se criam entre o que está exposto e quem visita a casa num dia e hora concretos. Perguntas e respostas em voz alta e em tempo real no lugar de literatura então onde Pessoa morou e viveu os últimos 15 anos da sua vida. Os bilhetes custam 6 euros e estão à venda online na plataforma Ball e, naturalmente, também na bilheteira da Casa Fernando Pessoa. No domingo, dia 5 de julho, há novo passeio literário nas ruas de Fernando Pessoa, sempre no primeiro domingo de cada mês, com início às 3 da tarde. Do Largo de São Carlos até à Rua dos Douradores, com o apoio de elementos multimédia, este passeio literário pelo Chiado, Rossio e Baixa Pombalina leva-nos à descoberta da vida e obra de Fernando Pessoa na Lisboa que foi o seu lar. O passeio é também orientado por um especialista em Fernando Pessoa, nada mais nada menos que este vosso, e portanto espero por vós, sei que vão divertir-se e gostar. Os bilhetes custam 10 euros por pessoa e as marcações são efetuadas por e-mail até à 1 da tarde da véspera do dia de cada passeio literário, portanto até à 1 da tarde deste próximo sábado. O percurso apenas se realiza com o número mínimo de 5 participantes. Mais informações e reservas através do e-mail omeupessoa@hotmail.com, omeupessoa@hotmail.com, ou através do telefone WhatsApp 92 904 1170, 92 904 1170. Finalmente, digo-vos ainda que a peça teatral do Duke of Parma, um ateado em pouco tempo texto projeto inédito de Fernando Pessoa vai ser levado à cena pela primeira vez. Vai acontecer com o financiamento da Câmara Municipal de Parma, através da Universidade local, e integrará a programação da Capital Europeia da Juventude, que vai recair sobre Parma em 2027. Estão previstas 2 sessões, nos dias 12 e 13 de fevereiro, no Teatro Lenz, em Parma, e um debate aberto ao público após a última data da representação, de que falaremos, obviamente, aqui muito em breve no Fernando Pessoa para todas as pessoas.
Não sou nada.
Nunca serei nada.
Não posso querer ser nada.
À parte isso.
Tenho em mim todos os sonhos do mundo.
Ora, façam então o favor de entrar sem pedir licença em mais uma emissão do Fernando Pessoa para todas as pessoas, aqui na Rádio Movimento, a emitir de Arroios, Lisboa, Portugal, para todos os cantos do mundo onde houver internet. Eu sou o Ricardo Belo de Morais e comigo está hoje na regia e na assistência técnica o Vítor Machado. Hoje temos um convidado internacional para falar de uma questão nunca antes abordada no programa, a questão judaica em Fernando Pessoa. Uma nota importante que quero deixar desde já: a entrevista que se segue vai ser conduzida em inglês, porque o português de Marco Roth ainda não é suficiente para uma conversa da envergadura da elaboração que vamos ter de fazer. Marco Roth é crítico cultural da Tablet Magazine, que tenho aqui na mão, uma revista norte-americana dedicada à vida judaica contemporânea. Ele nasceu em Nova Iorque, estudou literatura comparada nas universidades de Columbia e Yale, onde obteve um mestrado em filosofia, focando-se em continuidades ocultas entre o romantismo e o modernismo. Em 2004, Marco Roth cofundou a revista literária e política N+1, dedicada à divulgação de novos escritores e ideias subvalorizadas pelo público norte-americano. Colaborador regular da revista como escritor e editor, Roth deixou-a em 2021 para se dedicar a tempo inteiro à escrita. E para além da N+1, os seus ensaios sobre literatura, arte, arquitetura, urbanismo e até psicanálise, tanto pessoais como analíticos, por vezes ambos ao mesmo tempo, foram publicados na The London Review of Books, na New Yorker, na Harper's Magazine e no New York Review of Architecture, entre outras publicações. Em 2013, Farrar, Straus e Giraud publicaram-lhe The Scientists, a Family Romance, que Roth descreveu como uma memória anti-memórias dos seus anos formativos. O livro larga por sobre uma história de amadurecimento passada no meio intelectual do Upper West Side de Manhattan, numa família marcada por segredos durante o final dos anos 80 e início dos anos 90, enquanto o pai de Roth morria de VIH-Sida. Em setembro de 2004, o meu convidado, Marco Roth, emigrou para Portugal, onde vive atualmente a tempo inteiro, em Lisboa. Na revista Tablet, que já vos mostrei, de junho, o nosso convidado, Marco Roth, publicou um inusitado artigo que vou fazer por mostrar, sobre a abordagem feita por Fernando Pessoa à questão judaica. A propósito, imaginem, do prefácio que Fernando Pessoa escreveu em 1932 para Alma Errante, o livro de poemas do amigo de Fernando Pessoa, Eliezer Kamenezky, um judeu russo, vegetariano e naturista, radicado em Portugal e que tinha um alfarrabista bric-a-brac ali bem junto ao miradouro de São Pedro de Alcântara, com entrada para o bairro Alto. Muitos de nós ainda temos até a presença viva de Eliezer Kamenezky enquanto ator na era dourada do cinema português, especialmente em filmes como O Pai Tirano, de 1941, e O Pátio das Cantigas, de 1942. E o que é certo é que no princípio dos anos 30, quando tomaram conhecimento, fez-se logo ali uma amizade. Há histórias mitológicas ou não de que Fernando Pessoa teria um quartinho dentro da loja de Eliezer Kamenezky onde podia aliviar algum copo bebido a mais, mas o que é certo é que através da natureza e da vertente comercial de alfarrabista do estabelecimento, também através dos livros, Fernando Pessoa tinha ali um dos seus poesos obrigatórios, mas tendo em conta que, segundo sabemos e tudo parece querer fazer indicar, ao longo da sua vida a percorrer o mundo inteiro, Eliezer Kamenezky acumulou conhecimentos e uma mundividência que muito agradariam a Pessoa. Recordo então, agora que estamos em tempo de começar a nossa conversa, que esta minha entrevista a Marco Roth vai ser conduzida em inglês e, não sendo habitual, já aconteceu várias vezes aqui no programa, assumindo nós e eu em particular que um bocadinho melhor ou um bocadinho pior, todos nós hoje em dia já temos quase que uma obrigação de entender muito bem esta língua num mundo que é uma aldeia cada vez mais global. Estão, obviamente, à vontade para, na caixa de comentários das redes sociais onde nós transmitimos, colocarem questões durante ou após o programa sobre o que foi concretamente discutido, e eu terei todo o prazer em fazer em português um resumo escrito daquilo que tiver ligação com as vossas questões. Vamos então à nossa conversa, interview.
Que maçada a quererem que eu seja de companhia.
So, Marco Roth, thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us and be here today to discuss your very unusual article, Fernando Pessoa and the Jewish Question, regarding the preface that Fernando Pessoa wrote for an obscure book of poetry by Eliezer Kamenezky, as I was detailing as much as I could in Portuguese before this happened.
Thank you, Ricardo. It's a real pleasure and an honor also to be invited on this program and to let me pollute this with English, although you were very gracious in suggesting that everyone should learn English or knows English, but in fact it should be me who is speaking in Portuguese. But as you say, I mean, I've lived here for now almost 2 years, and while I feel comfortable fumbling in Portuguese, I don't think I would feel comfortable fumbling on the radio in Portuguese.
Indeed.
So
yes,
thank you so much for...
We agree on that, and your Portuguese will be getting better because you're not sitting under the tree waiting for a miracle to happen, and hopefully in the future we'll be having opportunity to have similar discussions, maybe on this subject, it or others that you might uncover, and we'll do it in Portuguese. But
Espero que sim.
oh, there you go, there you go. First and foremost, though, it should be said that there are only two major traces of Pessoa in terms of evidence of Pessoa and Kamenezky's friendship. Of course, you have testimony by mutual friends. You have writings of Pessoa of a diaristic, journal nature. But the two main testaments of their friendship is Pessoa's translation of the novel Eliezer, and there you go, Pessoa's preface for Eliezer's book of poems, Alma Errante, which you could translate by wandering or errant
The wandering soul.
Yeah. This preface is known of, you could say, by only a portion of Pessoan scholars. Only some, it should be said, very few of those have read it as if to analyze it in depth. And I should say, I never worried myself to do it, for instance. Many others way more academic prominence than myself haven't done it either. Otherwise, I think this might have been hinted, although not in the depth that you have discovered. So my first question is, how did you get in your article, how did you get inside the deeper meaning of Pessoa's texts, his preface? Because
this is a great story, and it's a great Lisbon story, and I think Lisbon, like all great cities, is many cities in one. And of course, as an expat or as an immigrant, you tend to stay only within people of your own language group, or you move very slowly. And although I do have some Portuguese friends, for about a year, there's clearly also a desire to maintain the city of the Portuguese among this influx of migrations of various kinds, whether it's the moneyed kind from France and the US or other kinds. So one discovers the city very slowly. And I was lucky in the sense that I made a friend who was like, oh, come to dinner with these other friends of mine who were poets. And this turned into a kind of Pessoaistic evening of much drinking. And one of the people was not a poet, but in fact the great Pessoa scholar, Nuno Ribeiro, who... He and I started talking, and he was interested in Pessoa's relationship to Kabbalah and Judaism. And he asked me, since I was probably the only Jew that he's met in the flesh, or at least, who acknowledges themselves as such, which is, of course, part of the story that we will get to later. So I know nothing about Kabbalah, but he was telling me that about the friendship between Pessoa and Kamenezky, and he was the one who pointed me to this, to the novel autobiography. Kamenezky would have called it an autobiography that he wrote about the first, 25 years of his life. It's 300 pages that Pessoa translated to English. That on its own is a great story. But then there was also this preface to the poetry. But really anything that I know about, in terms of the existence of these texts, is thanks to Nuno, who is an amazing scholar of Pessoa, and also extremely generous, because he was just like, oh, take a look at this. And I was like, well, Nuno, have you read this preface? And he was like, I don't know if I've read it closely. Because to me, and I think this is also where I benefited from my training as a literary critic, because I thought, oh, well, this is a... But it also should be said that, of course, I immediately was like, well, somebody else must have written about this. And indeed, the great Pessoa biographer Richard Zenith, in his Pessoa and Experimental Life, does discuss this preface. I have a very different interpretation from Zenith, and I think some of this is has to do with when I'm encountering the preface, because Zenith writes this in, the book is published in 2021, and it's a moment of almost progressive hope, and Zenith takes some of Pessoa's ideas about what I would call Pessoa's playfulness about racial stereotypes and essences, and thinks of it as a kind of outmoded way of thinking about human beings, but it's not the preface to Kamenezky is not Zenith's focus in any way.
Yeah.
in that. And I thought, okay, and also he has to go through so much material. It comes rather late in Pessoa's life. He writes it in 1932. So my feeling is, if you I have great respect for biographers because I know that I could never be one. And so, I think that by the time he gets to the preface, he's like, okay, I've already discussed Pessoa and Judaism in certain ways. This isn't the most important thing for me. But I think that there's a reading available of the preface that people missed. And unfortunately, I do read French, I read Spanish, and I could with difficulty, and also with Nuno's assistance, read Portuguese. So I would ask him. I would say, "Is this translation crazy? Is he actually saying this?" And Nuno would be like, "Yes, I think that's a fair reading of." Or he would say, "If you're crazy, then I'm crazy in the same way." So at least we agree that we're both crazy.
Good. So all this stresses the point that sometimes we should be more careful when we are studying a person, a writer, an artist, whatever, on the contents of the prefaces that he writes to others, because in fact there were lots of nuggets to be taken out of such a wording like Pessoa produced for Kamenezky's book on Judaism, and this was supposed to be a preface where Pessoa, an established poet, would be lending some of his, some of his own credibility, fame, whatever you want, prestige to the debut book of poems of a friend, as sometimes happens when we ask of it. But the thing is that it goes way overboard from that, and all Portuguese-speaking people can and should now be curious to actually read the complete version of the preface, the Pessoa's preface to Alma Errante, because it's available in several places online, and made this conversation be a sort of like an instigation for you to go look it up and read it, because a little known fact is that Pessoa found out in his adult years that he had Jewish ancestors himself on his father's side, and that these Jewish ancestors, were persecuted by the Catholic Inquisition, something that helped Fernando Pessoa feel, I should say, a strong aversion to the Church as organized by the Vatican. Would you think that this informed to some extent in this situation, the persecution of Pessoa's Jewish ancestors, informed Fernando Pessoa's ranting on this preface?
Well, I don't know if I would characterize the preface as ranting. I think it's very meticulous, but in a very, I think it's hard to tell with Pessoa when he writes prose in this way what the tone is. And I think that for me, I interpreted this as a very balanced irony. And that and in some ways, in order to be really effective as an ironist, you have to be sincere. So he sincerely inhabits and this is, of course, Pessoa's also a great gift, right, which is that he can sincerely inhabit completely opposing points of view. And he does this even in the essay. Yeah. And so, but to go back to the initial question, which is, so I don't know how much, I think his relationship with Kamenezky is very interesting because Kamenezky is the first real live Jew that Pessoa meets. Yeah. And Kamenezky has a great history in which he's sort of a proto-hippie. He managed to travel the whole world with no money between the ages of 15 and 23 before finally settling first in Brazil and then moving to Lisboa in I think 1923. So this is a man who traveled the world, and Pessoa, of course, is somebody who writes often about the desire to travel and the desire to move, but he can never get anywhere. And so this person who is also, he always travels as a Jew, and he never denies it. There's one moment in the autobiography where he decides that maybe he can pass as an Orthodox Christian, and maybe that's a better idea. But for the most part, he's explicitly Jewish, and his life in Lisbon was explicitly lived as a Jew. He had no interest in converting. He attended the synagogue here. Yeah. And for Pessoa, you can imagine, I think part of the thrill of discovering this as a literary critic and is that you then also imagine what the encounter must have been like. And so clearly there was this friendship where, Pessoa is basically in charge of writing Kamenezky into English and probably improves the text because the autobiography in English reads like a kind of Jack London meets Isaac Babel memoir, and that text on its own is also kind of great. And so by the time Pessoa gets to write the preface, the problem is that the Kamenezky's poems are truly kind of thin gruel. So, you wouldn't want to write this preface by quoting a lot of the poems. So I think Pessoa was just like, well, this is my chance to sound off on this idea of what poets are, and also this relationship between people being both themselves and their opposites, and especially with stereotypes. And he starts with this by saying, one of the great examples in the preface is that he says, the English are extremely materialistic, but they write amazing lyric poetry. And we can see this in the person of Shakespeare, who's lending money to his fellow townspeople at the same time that he's writing The Tempest. And this is a biographical fact about Shakespeare, that Shakespeare was also a moneylender, and people also think that, of course, the character of Shylock, the Jewish stereotype in The Merchant of Venice, is in a way a partial portrait of this side of Shakespeare, who Shakespeare was a non-Jewish moneylender. So I was like, well, this is also, what we see with Jews is that there are these stereotypes about them, that they're materialistic, but they're also but they're filled with this spiritual yearning. And I think this is also his kind of portrait of Kamenezky. And, sometimes you feel like he's kind of like, he's doing a sketch of this character. But then as he goes on, he creates this, he turns into a meditation on what was a big European theme in the 20s and the 30s, which is there such thing as essential Jewishness? And if so, can we get rid of it?
I get you. But if we are going to dive in deeper, let's say, in your article for Tablet, the one that I've been showcasing as much as possible, the June issue of Tablet is, of course, available for anybody who's interested to order, namely online. But
also the piece is unpaywalled, so you can read it for free.
Oh, great. In your article, you state that a preface wasn't just an opportunity to make distinctions, but also to philosophize about the relationship of poetry to reality. So, what do you think prompted Pessoa to use his preface to Kamenezky as a platform, actually a platform for his considerations on the essence of Jewishness, between commas.
I think this was of great interest to Pessoa in a personal sense, as you mentioned, not just because he discovered that he had Jewish ancestry, which he says explicitly in a biographical sketch that he does right before his death, I think in 1935. But of course, then there are these other places where he describes Álvaro de Campos as of the Portuguese Jewish type. But what's interesting is that he's neither too tall nor too short. He's neither dark nor fair. He's both. But again, there's this sense of doubleness. But Pessoa himself had been outed as a Jewish type by his friend Mario Sá in a text that was written in the 1920s called The Invasion of the Jews. And I think scholarly opinion is divided as to whether this was a kind of South Park-like troll about that was making fun of the anti-Semitic tendency that was really at that point coming from France into Portugal, but had this sense of like, how do we de-Judaize our culture? And so Pessoa had his photo was even published in this book by his friend Mario Sá, who himself was of Novo Cristiano ancestry. So this is why people think it's a troll. But it seems that this is not new in Jewish history of that period. I mean, one of the classic all-time texts of anti-Semitism was written by a German Jew, Austrian Jew, Otto Weininger, at the turn of the century, called Sex and Character, in which he says terrible things about Jews, meaning himself. And so there was a long tradition, in a way, of Jews philosophizing about central Jewishness that they were trying to get rid of. And Marx, on the Jewish question, is another example of this. So Pessoa, I think, having been outed as a Jew, and now he meets a real Jew, Kamenezky, and then he writes this preface, which is to the work, in which he's saying, well, here are all the things that people say against the Jews, and I'm going to refute them, but there is an essence of Judaism that sticks somewhere that I can locate. And then he has this remarkable passage in which he actually says that the essence of Judaism is saducismo. Which is, of course, an untranslatable word into English because it's from the Portuguese saudade. And what's interesting to me, my gloss on this was that what Pessoa ends up arguing in this, if this essay has a single argument, that argument is that the most distinctively Jewish thing about Jews is that they're Portuguese. Which, to me, that's a classic. I don't know if I can say mindfuck on the air, but I just did.
Oh, yes.
So here we are. It's a mindfuck. It blows your mind, especially if you're a Portuguese intellectual of the 1930s
who's trying to de-Judaize the Portuguese culture.
Correct. And I think that probably that was, in a way, although who knows how many people would have read this, but the intention there is to mess with the heads of fascist curious poets of the period, of which there are many.
Yes, and they were actually growing in their numbers at the time. And it's funny, well, it's not funny at all, how history keeps sadly repeating itself when it shouldn't. But the other considerations, what could be said, and you actually say it, is that Pessoa tackles the conspiracist claims made by enemies of the Jewish people. So you state that Jews, the understanding of that time might be that Jews have a secret agenda to undermine and overthrow Greco-Roman Christian European civilization. And against this preconception, what you noticed in Pessoa's preface was that he manages to state that it wasn't Jews or Freemasons, for that matter, they come hand in hand in Pessoa's thinking. Jews or Freemasons weren't the ones who fomented the French Revolution, for example, or the Russian Revolution. So it was the tyranny of the Ancien Régime à la France and of Czarist Russia that had brought about, and I quote, brought about their own downfall. Do you think that this was sort of like a warning already? Pessoa feeling or trying to infer that there should be warnings in 1932 about Portuguese and European politics from what was happening and what could be seen in the political life and in the daily newspapers of European countries?
Well, I think it's difficult always to say whether somebody predicts the future or has a sense of. But I think that if you're alive,
he was good at it.
Well, yes, and also, but I think if you're alive in your time and you're alive to all the currents in your time, then you do have a sense of what might be happening and what's coming. And of course, I think that what I would say about this preface is that it is a fundamentally anti-fascist text.
Yes.
And that to me is what's very that's the most remarkable thing for me is that it's written kind of at the height of the fascist moment in Europe. And there are no other texts really. Sartre doesn't write Anti-Semite and Jew until 1944, when most of the Jews of France have already been shipped off to concentration camps. Adorno and Horkheimer from exile write the anti-Semitism chapter of Dialectic of Enlightenment about German anti-Semitism, again in the 40s. Most of this is happening after the fact, and most of these are about, like, what is the anti-Semitic mind? And Pessoa instead is like, what is a Jew? Which is a very interesting, it's a very broad-minded text for somebody who is equivocally Jewish, right? And I think this is what's so he and we'll see when we get to the end of the text. There's a great moment at the end of the text that we will talk about. I hope we have time. But basically, Pessoa is like, don't think in terms of essential identities. There's no national identity, right? Like this is there are characteristics, but these characteristics also contain their opposites. So it's very hard to make essential claims about, well, the Portuguese are this, but their enemies are the Jews. And this is why he says, like, the most distinctive thing about Jews is that they're actually Portuguese. They share this sense of saudosismo with the Portuguese, which so everybody thinks saudade is like the quintessence of Portugueseness, but actually, perhaps it's distributed.
And Pessoa even believed that there was something to be taken out of what it meant being a Jew and the Jewish history, even in religious studies, when he was sort of comparing Jews to his own notions of the Quinto Imperio.
Oh yes, well, I don't think I can get into Quinto Imperio in this session with you. Especially, I think we will need at least a panel of 13 wise men and women to discuss Quinto Imperio. I would not dare.
Future nuptials. Future nuptials.
Perhaps, yes. But I think that he's very good at understanding that there's this, that there's something that we would call, now lazily, the Judeo-Christian roots of Western thought. And this term Judeo-Christian, everybody now, it also has like a slightly reactionary tone. Yes. So it has a reactionary element to it in the U.S. But what people forget is that in the 30s, what people were trying to do was precisely separate out this thing, and the Germans were very good at this, where they would be like, we're going to get, we have to de-Judaize the Christian tradition, or what we need is something more pagan. And so they basically were, this also turned into a kind of anti-Christian politics. So Pessoa is like, well, the things that we actually, if we're going to say that, the Jews value equality, well, this is also in the Gospels, right? So we can't blame the level. We can't say the Jews are responsible for the leveling tendency, right? Which is another one of these words that was
that keep on floating and coming up.
So I think that the text works, as I said, like it works as a very kind of solid anti-fascist work in that it takes you through. It's like, well, you might entertain this assumption about something and think that it's a fixed essence, but it's not.
Mm-hmm. In fact, because when you think about it, even if the preface that Fernando Pessoa wrote for Kamenezky's book of poetry has direct allusions against fascism, the emerging fascism that was, booming all over Europe, and the advent of what we now call far-right governments, or populist ones at least, but at the same time, we also have hints, well, not hints, actual factual references from Pessoa in the preface that Pessoa was fervently allergic to communism also, fascism and communism, calling it the hybrid, and I'm quoting, the hybrid product of Judaic mysticism and European stupidity, stressing, repeating the particle European stupidity. Was Pessoa, do you think, himself a Germanophile, considering what German had of positive in history until the beginning of the 20th century? Was Pessoa, do you think, already envisioning what would come to be World War II and even the Holocausts? It was evident that
I don't know if
fascism on one side, communism on the other side, building empires, nothing good could come of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is a question about could he, I mean, he doesn't really write about the possibility of mass death in the way that, that certain German writers could envision the Holocaust, right, before it happened. But what I don't know, and I think you're right also to point, I mean, when I said it's an anti-fascist text, it's also an anti-totalitarian text. And I think that's, I mean, calling it anti-totalitarian might be fairer.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, in that it's against essentialist thinking, and this is also for me what makes Pessoa such a great poet, which is that he's not, in the piece I also compare him to T.S. Eliot, who had his own theory of poetic impersonality, but really the poetic impersonality of T.S. Eliot is a way of affirming a culture that's all about him and people like T.S. Eliot, whereas Pessoa is multitudinous and plural. And I think that, again, you have a politics. If you are in yourself a pluralist, as Pessoa was, you're not just espousing pluralism, you feel pluralism, and this text is full of Pessoa's pluralism. Now, as I'm not a historian, but if I were thinking about this like a historian, I would want to know more about specifically what the Salazar regime thought about the promulgation of racial laws that were already kind of starting to come. You don't get the Nazis don't come to power until 1933. But these things are out there. There's a lot of, I think in my sense in Portugal is that it's aligned to the budding Falangist movement in Spain, but then also their influences from Action Française in France, which really was a kind of essentialist, like we can get rid of the Jews, right? And that I would want to know more about what Pessoa knew about whether there were proposed promulgations of racial laws in Portugal, and what those were like. Not knowing those things, I wouldn't necessarily want to take a leap. But I think that the text it's just what I say is that, he's not like you should like Kamenezky because he's a great poet, because he basically is like he's not a great poet. Yeah, but you should like Kamenezky because he's a human being in Lisbon who has the same rights of the streets as everyone else, and he's basically that this is a person who belongs in this society. And that's just as the Jews belong in the society. We can't take them out. Mm-hmm. And so that to me is the subtle political message of the preface. even if the explicit argument is that Jews, Portuguese were actually the same, which is a nice message also.
Yes, and very, very intriguing in itself also. I should say, and maybe now in Portuguese, aqui o prefácio de Fernando Pessoa para Alma Errante de Eliezer Kamenezky está largamente disponível em obra publicada, em antologias e também na internet, e que, de facto, por vezes a vida tem estas curiosidades, assim como o artigo e a presença em Lisboa do Marco Roth me foi comunicada e, através dos mecanismos de graus de separação, acabei por, ao fim destes anos todos de investigação pessoana, ir ler com olhos de ver pela primeira vez o prefácio de Fernando Pessoa e ver o que lá está de defesa do judaísmo e de oposição em 1932 ao totalitarismo é muito interessante, e penso que todos e todas ganharão em conhecer melhor este texto, um longuíssimo, extensíssimo prefácio que também invulgarmente Fernando Pessoa vai produzir para um pequeno livro de poemas. Portanto, fiquem com esta nota, é para ler, afinal de contas, ler com olhos de ver o prefácio que Fernando Pessoa escreveu para o livro Alma Errante de Eliezer Kamenezky. And now we still have a few minutes. We have to
talk about the end.
We do.
Yes, because in the end of the text has this moment where Pessoa says, of course no Jew could have written this preface.
No Jew could have written this preface.
Yes.
It's the end, sort of like a screeching halt end that Pessoa produces.
Yes, and it kind of overturns. Yes, and it's strange because it seems to overturn all of the anti-essentialist stuff that he'd been doing before. Except, I think that you have to then read this in the context of what Pessoa's ancestors were conversos, right? I mean, they converted, and part of conversion is the performative renunciation of Judaism.
Yes.
And so what Pessoa does with this is he's kind of also undoing the Mario Sa text, where he's like, look, I'm not a Jew. Don't think that I can also translate Aeschylus, which he says that no Jews can do, which is also absurd. But what that does is that, of course, this makes another equivocation between, if you can performatively apostatize, then there's no such thing as essential Judaism, right? This is a myth, because if you can convert, then you can convert. But if there's something that is essentially racially, genetically, epigenetically, however you want to theorize this, traumatically Jewish about you, then you can't convert. And so Pessoa is actually having it both ways at the end, where he's like, I am not. He's like, of course you don't think that I'm a Jew, but look, if you believe in racial essential Judaism, then of course I'm a Jew. And this is an irony. This is a playfulness that
a delicious irony. Yeah. Yes. No Jewish person would have been able to write this preface.
And it's actually a kind of great Jewish joke. Mm-hmm. So so we can read it both ways.
Well, I'm sure that now that we've opened this avenue of Pessoa and Judaism, thanks to you, and thanks to your essay on Fernando Pessoa and the Jewish question for the Tablet magazine on the June 2026 issue, we'll be having opportunity to go further on this subject. And again, I'm stressing for all our listeners and viewers, the preface of Fernando Pessoa for Alma Errante by Eliezer Kamenezky, after all, is something that we should really be looking at way more closely. Thank you so much, Marco Roth.
Oh, thank you for
being
this
here
conversation
and giving us the chance to partake on a segment of what you discovered.
I really do hope this becomes a larger conversation without me. And
yes.
I think it's a great pleasure as an outsider and as an amateur coming to this to be like, well, if this is something that leads to more and more serious scholarship from people who really have immersed themselves in Pessoa's life and thought and the history of the time, I would be grateful and happy.
Well, we are already grateful to you for your work and your presence. Thank you so much, Marco Roth, o nosso convidado desta semana. E assim termina o nosso programa desta quarta-feira, sempre às quartas-feiras, aliás, no meio da semana, entre as 8 e as 9 da noite, hora de Lisboa, naturalmente. Nós voltamos para a semana, no dia 8 de julho, para seguir ainda, aviso desde já, com uma nova entrevista conduzida em inglês. Desta vez com o escritor e tradutor escocês Colin Bramwell, que vem de publicar a antologia pessoana Pessoas, editada pela Carcanet no fim de 2025, e este livro, Pessoas, é uma tradução e adaptação criativa, naturalmente, de material pessoano, ortónimo e heterónimos, para o Scots, a língua escocesa, uma produção raríssima. E este livro, Pessoas, tem percorrido desde o seu lançamento no ano passado as listas dos principais prémios literários de tradução dos países anglófonos, acaba de vencer o Oxford Weidenfeld Prize, galardão de tradução literária importantíssimo no Reino Unido, e ainda esta semana acabou de vencer o The Highland Book Prize, um prémio de excelência para obras criadas em escocês. Portanto, também uma grande curiosidade para falarmos com Colin Bramwell para a semana e vermos o que ele tem para nos dizer. Ficamos por aqui e então despeço-me até ao próximo dia 8 de julho. Fiquem bem, fiquem com Pessoa e com os livros.
Movimento. Ao ritmo da sua vida.